What is up, everybody? Welcome back to EXJW Diaries. My name is Justin. It's been a little bit here. I had to take a small break from making videos. I had a couple big projects hit me back to back, so I wanted to get those out of the way before I sat down and started making videos again. That way I can actually concentrate on what I'm saying. But what a perfect subject to come back on. This is a subject that is really, really near and dear to me. It really helped me out during my process of leaving and recovering from the witnesses. But before we get into that, there's a couple cool XJW related things that happened while I was gone. Feel free to skip forward, but I'm sure some people will be interested. So the first thing may not be a big deal in the regular world, but for people coming out of the Jehovah's Witnesses, it's a very big deal, which is that back in February, I was able to celebrate my daughter's first birthday. We had a big party for her. Shout out to El Reno for coming to the party. Had a big party for her. And of course, at that age, the party's more so for the adults than the kid. She was pretty out of it. But it was still very, very nice to be able to do that. You know, coming from the Jehovah's Witnesses where birthdays are such a big thing, being in that environment for my own daughter, it reminded me how silly that is. Jehovah's Witnesses have no issue celebrating a wedding anniversary, which is the birthday of a marriage. And hey, marriages are special. They should be celebrated. But life is the greatest gift that there is. Why shouldn't that be celebrated as well? A birthday is nothing more than the anniversary of a new life. So for all of you out there who are just leaving, maybe you still have an issue with birthdays, just think about that one for a second. A wedding anniversary is the birthday of a marriage. A birthday is the anniversary of a new life. Now, the second cool thing that happened was I found out that a couple people from one of my old congregations woke up. These are two siblings, two sisters. They were very deep into it. These people were former pioneers, third generation on both sides, elders' daughters, and they're out. They were able to leave together. So once again, it just goes to show you never know who's going to leave. In fact, their dad was the very elder who asked me if I wanted to be a ministerial servant. So, I mean, it just goes to show, do not lose hope on your friends and family. You never know what's going to wake people up. So now let's get into the main subject here, self-forgiveness. Again, this is such an important topic. It had such a big impact on me when I was going through my recovery process after leaving the witnesses. Mostly because as a witness, you are very, very self-critical. You're never doing enough. You can never really be enough. And even though you stop going to meetings, some of those mental tendencies can stick with you after you leave. And one of those tendencies is being very hard on yourself, carrying around guilt, carrying around shame like it's something that you need to just hold on to. And so this is why learning about self-forgiveness and self-compassion is very important when you're leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses. You don't want to be going around with that type of attitude about yourself. Otherwise, how can you ever really love yourself? And of course, this is not something that the Jehovah's Witnesses really talk about. And I fact-checked myself on this. I went to the Watchtower online library. I typed in self-forgiveness. There was 22 instances where the words self and forgiveness appeared in the same sentence. But out of those 22 instances, there was only one that was actually talking about self-forgiveness. From the October 11th Awake magazine in 2018, it says, and I agree with this, self-forgiveness can be the most difficult to achieve, yet the most important to health, mental and physical, according to the journal Disability and Rehabilitation. So here they admit that it's important, both mentally and physically, and yet it's only mentioned once out of all those articles available. And it's a quote from another journal. It's not even their own words. So what about self-compassion? So I typed that in to Watchtower Online Library, self-compassion. There was 17 instances where those two words appeared in the same sentence. Out of those 17 instances, there was 0 that were actually talking about self-compassion. I think that says a whole lot about the religion and their culture, if you ask me. So obviously, these subjects are not being given the attention that they deserve. And if you're a good Jehovah's Witness, you take in the majority, if not all of your information, especially the information that you're actually going to apply to your life, you take that in from the publications that are produced by the Watchtower. And so if you're limited to only that source of information, then you may not have even been exposed to these concepts of self-forgiveness and self-compassion, not in any real deep way. They might touch on it for a second, but not in any real deep way. So let's give it the attention that it deserves, because it really does deserve it. I don't know who out there needs to hear this, but I just hope that this gets to the right people, because, again, this is such an important subject for people that are leaving the witnesses, which is such a self-critical society. So let's get into this. So let's just start at the foundation, then we'll build up from there. What exactly is self-forgiveness? So here's a very good explanation. Self-forgiveness is a choice that only you can make for yourself from a place of self-empowerment. It's a choice to stop weaponizing your past against yourself. It's not denying responsibility or minimizing the impact of your actions. It's about acknowledging your humanity, learning from your mistakes, and refusing to let guilt or shame define your future or your identity. It's the understanding that growth requires self-compassion, not self-punishment. And so since we mentioned self-compassion, and since that plays a big part in this, let's define that as well. So here's an explanation for that. Self-compassion is the psychological shift from treating yourself as a problem that needs to be fixed to embracing yourself as a human to be understood. Where self-criticism attacks, self-compassion responds with clarity and care, creating a mental space to learn and grow without fear. And as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, we know how much that fear element plays a big part. Ultimately, self-compassion really boils down to having emotional intelligence and recognizing that positive change requires positive and healthy support. So this is really about supporting yourself. Again, this plays a big part, both of these, in having healthy self-love, which is so important for anybody, but especially for people coming out of a religious group like the Jehovah's Witnesses that teaches you to be so self-critical. It's a tattletale culture, both for yourself and others. You're always evaluating yourself as if you're a good Jehovah's Witness or not. There's always this fear. The worst nightmare for any Jehovah's Witness is that the end time comes and you are just over that line. Something you did was just over that limit, and you don't get into paradise. You missed it by 1%. That's like the worst fear. And so that just having that fear causes a hyper-fixation on your own faults. We'll get into that more. So why is self-forgiveness and self-compassion so important? Well, if you've been a Jehovah's Witness before, you know that without these things, you are trapped in the psychological prison of guilt and shame. Even for small things. I mean, we're talking about Jehovah's Witnesses here. Most Jehovah's Witnesses aren't doing big, crazy things. They're not making big, crazy mistakes. You're holding things over your head that are small in the regular world. You consider yourself inadequate, undeserving for small little things, small mistakes. And just to illustrate how small the mistake can be, I'm gonna give you an example. Very realistic example. Imagine we have a brother. He's just become a ministerial servant. Now, when you just become a ministerial servant, the eye is on you even more. And let's say this brother goes to the hall cleaning. Now, this is the major hall cleaning where you have multiple congregations that all attend that kingdom hall, all coming together to clean that hall and do maintenance on it. Now, since he just became a ministerial servant, this is a very, very good event for him to show his face at. So he comes there and he's doing this and that. He's even doing the jobs that nobody wants to do, like cleaning the bathrooms. But during his time there, people are vacuuming the kingdom hall. The sisters are running up and down the aisles. One of them goes too far and the power cord comes unplugged. Now, this brother just happens to be walking past at that very moment. And she says, "Hey, brother, can you please plug that back in for me?" Not an issue, right? So he reaches down, but this sister did not turn off the vacuum. So when he goes to plug it in, there's a loud pop and a giant blue spark flies right at him. And he says, "Oh, uh-oh." Now, can you imagine how much anxiety would be flooding through you as you realize what you just said? I mean, you're a Jehovah's Witness and a ministerial servant at that. So not only did you curse, you said the F word, which is the worst. In many different languages, it's considered the worst one. And you said the F word inside the kingdom hall. I mean, my goodness. Can you imagine how much anxiety would be flooding through you? And this is a simple mistake. Now, in an instance like that, people might look at you. Some people might kind of snicker. You might have brother high and mighty who feels the need to come over and give you some counsel, right? But honestly, this is a simple mistake. And that's the real reason that I brought it up, because we all have these things. We all have these things that are reactions that don't hurt anybody, but that bypass that JW filter that we usually have to go through. Whether it's hammering something and you accidentally hit your nail, or you have a big ass spider land on your lap, or a big ass bumblebee fly right past you. No matter what it is, we all have these things, right? And again, it's not hurting anybody, but it is bypassing that typical JW filter. And it's just a natural human response because, well, you're human. But the issue with that is, again, Jehovah's Witnesses are taught to be very self-critical. And so even though the congregation and the people around him may eventually move on, even though Brother High and Mighty might give him a pat on the shoulder and say, well, it's okay after he gives him his counsel, even though this brother might, after he gets his composure, go off to a corner and say a little prayer, Jehovah, please forgive me, I did not mean to say that in your house, even after all that, for Jehovah's Witness, small mistake like that, it can be very hard to move on. Because as a witness, in those type of instances where you're around other Jehovah's Witnesses, doing Jehovah's Witness things in a Jehovah's Witness place, in those instances, that perfectionism dial gets turned all the way up. You have to be on a whole nother level. And so when you mess up in that type of instance, oh man, it really weighs on you. And so now months have passed, and yet when this brother walks past where that outlet is, he still feels the cringe of that moment. He might be at the meeting giving a question and answer part, which if you've been a ministerial servant or an elder, those are sometimes more difficult than giving a straight up talk. Because you got to really pay attention to what the audience is saying while also paying attention to the time, while also making sure you get the whole subject covered. Then sometimes you ask a question and nobody raises their hands, and other times everybody raises their hands. It's quite the job. But on this particular day, this brother is doing that job, and he happens to glance over to a sister raising her hand, and behind that sister is that outlet, and that shakes him up. Now he's messing up and stumbling through the whole part. When the next major hall cleaning comes up, he doesn't know if he should go to it or just stay back, stay home. And see, this is why having that self-forgiveness is so important. This is the level of anxiety that can come up in somebody just for something that small, something that simple, something that human. Here the congregation has moved on. Here he's prayed to Jehovah. Jehovah's moved on. He hasn't moved on. And so this leads to an important question. If self-compassion and self-forgiveness are so important, if they went as far as to quote another journal and put it in their magazine saying how important this stuff is, why aren't they talking about it themselves? Well, I have a few theories why they don't. Number one, self-forgiveness allows you to step into your own power. It requires you to step into your own power. And a self-empowered person is dangerous to a high control group. It takes self-empowerment to say, my mistakes don't define me. To say, I don't need to hold myself up to unrealistic expectations of perfection. To say, I'm allowed to mess up and learn from it and move on. I don't have to keep punishing myself. It takes self-empowerment to say all those things. Now, another thing that self-forgiveness and self-compassion requires is self-awareness. And if you're the leader of a high control group, you want your members to be the least self-aware as possible. You need those people to be on autopilot mode. The only self-awareness that Jehovah's Witnesses really have, typically, is a hyperfixation on their own shortcomings. A hyperfixation on how good of a Jehovah's Witness they are being at any given moment. But it requires true, healthy self-awareness to say, wow, I am beating myself up for something that happened 50 years ago. And so when you have these things, that frees you from that prison of guilt and shame. And so for the Watchtower, it's in their best interest not to really talk about these things because they need people to stay in that prison. Because by staying in that prison, a couple things happen. Number one, it keeps Jehovah's Witnesses emotionally dependent on the organization. If they can't forgive themselves, they will seek the Watchtower for approval. And it's not too hard to imagine this. I mean, in that same case with this brother, he might feel so bad about it that now he feels the need to do more hours out in service or take on extra parts because he's trying to make up for his mistake. And I'm sure many of us as witnesses, you make a mistake, whatever it is, you do something that you feel is disappointing Jehovah, whatever it is, and now you feel that in order to make up for that, you got to do more things for the organization. Outside of your comfort zone even. Do more to make up for this. That way, if the end comes, I'm paying off that debt. right? So I can get over that line. That's a very unhealthy way to be. That's a very unhealthy way to treat yourself. Now, another reason is that without self-forgiveness and without self-compassion, you can't really have self-trust. You can't really build it. And of course, the Watchtower doesn't want people to have self-trust. They want people to think about, oh, is this okay? Well, let me go to the organization first and figure out if it's okay. They can't trust themselves for fear of making a mistake. Because if they do make a mistake, they can't forgive themselves for it. And so hopefully you can see that by not having self-forgiveness, by not having self-compassion, it's another thing that gives the Watchtower ultimate control over their members. And after you leave the witnesses, even though they may not have that direct control, you are still treating yourself in the way that they have taught you to treat yourself, in a very self-critical, hyper-aware of your shortcomings, the way that you would never want a friend to treat you. And that's the thing. A lot of witnesses treat themselves in a way that they would never let somebody else treat them, but they do that to themselves. And so before we end this, I just want to give you guys a couple powerful ways that you can practice self-forgiveness, that you can learn self-compassion, which again is needed after being in a group where you were taught to be very self-critical about yourself. So here's 3 very powerful ways that you can do this. So the first way is to release the need to punish yourself. I know for myself, when I look at myself today, I am far more of a disciplined person today than I ever was as a Jehovah's Witness, in many ways. But that discipline did not come from punishing myself. In fact, it came from loving myself more. The second way that you can practice self-forgiveness and self-compassion, learn to fail forward. Replace I should have with now I will. You don't need to hold yourself accountable for the things you did 10 years ago based on the knowledge that you have today. Forgive yourself, now you know better, so now you'll do better. And lastly, this is a very powerful one. Give yourself the gift of understanding. It's that simple. Give yourself the gift of understanding. Can you do that? And this is such a big, important part of forgiveness as a whole, understanding. I think this is a very key missing piece that Jehovah's Witnesses tend to skip over whenever they do talk about forgiveness. And think about this. Jehovah's Witnesses call themselves Christians, right? Forgiveness, you could say, is a cornerstone of Christianity. It's one of the core beliefs, forgiveness, the concept of forgiveness. And so if Jehovah's Witnesses claim to be the true Christians, everybody else is false Christians. They're the only true ones. If that is the truth, then shouldn't they have the highest, deepest understanding of forgiveness, even when it comes to that divine forgiveness that they expect from Jehovah? So here we have people that are calling themselves the most true Christians, the most accurate Christians. They say in Jesus Christ's name at the end of every prayer, and yet they are missing one of the key things that Jesus showed in his examples of what forgiveness is all about. Again, that understanding. And they miss it even though it's right in their face. I mean, whether you believe in the Bible or not, we're all on different belief paths. Whether you believe in Jesus or not, again, we're all on different belief paths. I myself am definitely on a different belief path. But there's certain instances in the Bible where your belief or disbelief does not nullify the wisdom that you can gain from the story. And so one of those stories, and I'm sure that those of you out there who are PMO, those of you out there who are just waking up, the memorial just happened. It's a major day for Jehovah's Witnesses. So I'm sure you probably read this scripture while you were at that memorial, but I'm sure you didn't read it like this. So let's just use the Jehovah's Witnesses Bible kind of against themselves, all right? Let's just do it. And let's just see what forgiveness is all about when we really dive deep into it. And again, this is not going to matter what your beliefs are. We're going to go above religion in a second anyways. But let's just read this scripture just because it opens up a doorway to a deeper discussion here. Luke 23, verse 33. You know this one. And they got to the place called Skull. They nailed him to the stake there alongside the criminals, one on his right, one on his left. But Jesus was saying, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Furthermore, they cast lots to distribute his garments. And the people stood looking on, but the rulers were sneering and saying, Others he saved. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one. So let's just stop there. I mean, this is a horrific scene. Imagine, you're up there, whether it's a stake or a cross, you have your hands nailed through wood. Okay, the shape of it doesn't really matter. That has got to be excruciating pain. All right, you're suffering. While you're suffering, you're watching these people distribute your stuff. They're mocking you. Now, when Jehovah's Witnesses read the scripture, they're usually reading it from the point of expressing how Jesus showed mercy and compassion to these people. But let's go deeper than that. Let's go deeper into that forgiveness element, into that understanding element. Because Jesus was not just an ordinary man. Okay, this is a guy that was seen to walk on water, turn water into wine, raise the dead, heal the deaf, heal the blind. He has shown that he can do things that are extraordinary, beyond human, beyond regular human, right? So just to push this point further, now let's go above religion for a second, okay? Let's get into some quantum physics. So there's this thing called string theory. And in string theory, they say it would take at least 11 dimensions for our third dimensional reality to actually work, to actually function. So if that's the case, if this theory is correct, and of course we're going beyond what humans at this point in time can really detect. So all we have is theories on this. So if we assume string theory is correct, and we take this story of Jesus and bring him into modern times, back then they would call all those actions miracles. But now, in our modern day, if we bring somebody like that in the modern times, we would say, somehow, some way, we don't understand, but this is a man who has the ability to access functionality of higher dimensions and use those functions to cause some direct result in our third dimensional physical reality. Whether it's bringing people back to life, changing the matter to where water becomes wine, being able to walk on water, etc., etc. Now, another thing that Jesus showed was the ability to have perspectives that are non-local. So if he's in one place, he is able to have a perspective of something that's happening in some other place or some other time. Now, again, going above religion and string theory, they say that we as humans experience reality as 3 dimensions, 3 spatial dimensions, plus 1 time dimension. And due to our perspective, we perceive time as linear. The future's ahead of us, we are now in the present, the past is behind us. But the theory goes that if you're able to step upstairs and have a perspective above this dimension, that you would eventually get to a point where you are now outside of time. And at that point, time would no longer be linear. It would all be happening at the same time. And so to illustrate this, they say that if you were able to look at your house from this higher dimensional perspective, what you would see is yourself in your house in every single room at the same time, doing everything that you ever have done in that house. You would see everybody who's ever lived in that house before you. You would see the forest or field that was in that space before your house was built. You would see everything happening all at once. And so again, Jesus showed that he did have this ability through various scriptures to have perspectives that were non-local time, non-local space, right? And so if he had these abilities, then this scene that's going on in this set of scriptures can be completely different to how a normal human being would perceive these things. When he's saying these words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, that's a very deep moment when you consider these other factors, when you consider that higher dimensional perspective that he would have had access to. And so now just imagine somebody in that position, as he's looking out to all these people, doing all these harmful, hurtful, hateful things to him, he can also see their very history, their grandfather's great-great-great-grandfather, and everything that he went through, all the values that were instilled in him, and how everything was passed down one generation to the next, all the trauma that was passed down one generation to the next. He can see their home life. He can see everything that has led up to that moment, why they would have the mindset to follow through with these orders without any question. He can understand them. He knew in that moment what it was like to actually be them in that spot doing those things. He understood them. He understood why they were there. He understood it couldn't have been any other way. He would be able to see throughout all of time everything that led up to that moment and understand everybody who contributed to that moment. And so by having that perspective, he could have that element of understanding when he said those words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He knew that they really didn't know what they were doing. He knew because he understood things as if he was them. Because again, he showed that he had that power through other scriptures. So, I mean, just think about that for a second. Think about that perspective that's beyond time and space. Now, here we are as regular human beings, but you can at least imagine that, right? Can you imagine that for yourself? Can you give yourself that level of understanding, that higher dimensional level of understanding? If you made some mistake, if you have some tendency, whatever it is, think about your grandparents' grandparents, the values that were instilled in them, the struggles that they went through. I know in my case, my great-grandparents were in the Great Depression. And so living and surviving through that period of the Great Depression caused them to have certain edges in certain areas, right? We're all born very soft. We're all born innocent. And as we go through life, depending on the situations that we go through, we have these sharp edges that end up forming on ourselves. And everybody's going to be a little bit different. And depending on how it forms and where it forms, you treat people differently. You treat situations differently. And now that gets passed on to the next generation in one way or another. Either they change things, they keep things the same. Sometimes they overcompensate based on the way that they were treated by their parents or their grandparents or whatever caretaker that they had. And so it gets through all these generations until it finally reaches you. And this gets into something called epigenetics that's being studied right now. And one thing that they're finding in this is that trauma can pass through genes. So you can have trauma responses that you're exhibiting that are not even your own. It's due to trauma that your great-great-great-grandparents went through. But for some reason, that has passed down. It was such a big impact, it passed down, and now you have it. And now you're acting in a way, and you don't know why. And it's because of something that happened that's outside of your lifetime. But if you were able to give yourself that higher dimensional perspective, you would understand. You could give yourself that self-forgiveness because you could understand. Now, one of the big reasons why I wanted to make this video is because, again, this is such a big deal when you're coming out of a group like the Jehovah's Witnesses, where you were taught to be very self-critical. Even though you stop going to meetings, you can bring that stuff along with you. You can stay in that prison of guilt and shame. And it's really only you that can free yourself from it. But it takes self-empowerment. It takes self-awareness. It takes self-compassion in order to give yourself that self-forgiveness. And another reason why this is so important for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses is, like I said in a previous video, many of us, if not all of us, did things as Jehovah's Witnesses that hurt ourselves or hurt other people in small ways or big ways, simply due to the fact that we were trying to be a good Jehovah's Witness. Whether it's being an elder, taking part in a judicial committee, somebody got disfellowshipped, you contributed to that. Whether it's turning somebody in for something, whether it's doing something that harms yourself, like you had natural talent, you had natural smarts, and something that would have got you further in life. But you were told not to pursue those dreams. You were told not to go to school. And so you took something lower, and now you regret that. Anybody leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses is going to have some amount of regrets. You know, we were in such a purity culture. Some of those regrets caused heartbreaks. I mean, I've heard of cases where you have two people that are dating, they get pretty far along. You know, they're talking serious about marriage, even though they've only been together for a few months, but that's how things are as witnesses, right? So they're getting serious. They really like each other. And then the girl tells the guy, usually this is more of an issue with women than it is men. That kind of says a lot about the organization. But the woman tells the man, you know, hey, back when I was a teenager, I went through a rebellious period. Or maybe she went out one night, you know, in the wrong area, got taken advantage of. Or maybe she was abused. But whatever reason, this woman is no longer a virgin. Now, in the regular world, not a big deal. But to the witnesses, that's grounds for breaking up. To the witnesses, no matter how beautiful this girl is, that will lower her value. And in a case like that, you may have broken things off. You may have broken her heart. And now you're out of the Jehovah's Witnesses and you realize what a small little thing that was that you turned into a big deal. And now you got to live with that. Can you give yourself forgiveness for that? There are some women out there who rushed into marriage. They married the wrong guy. The person turned out to be abusive. They had no way of being able to get out of that marriage. They asked for help. The elders tell them, be more submissive. Win him over with your love. That's not working. She's tired of being there. Now she feels that the only way out of that marriage is to cheat. So she cheats, she gets her freedom, but now feels bad about it. You did what you had to do in the place that you were at, with the knowledge that you had at the time, in the position that you were at the time. Can you give yourself some forgiveness? We can even go to the very extremes. You have some parents out there who had a child who gets hurt in some way or has some medical condition. They need a blood transfusion. The parent has been told the belief, this is a big no-no, you don't do that. And they let their child pass away. Then they leave the witnesses. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine the guilt of that? But still, even with that type of situation, you were doing what you were told to do with the beliefs that you had at the time, the knowledge that you were exposed to at that time. You were being manipulated. You were a puppet on strings. It wasn't even you. Can you give yourself some forgiveness? No matter what the case is, big or small, again, as Jehovah's Witnesses, we hurt ourselves, we hurt others, simply for the fact of being a good Jehovah's Witness. Whatever the case is, whatever regrets you have, please give yourself self-forgiveness and have self-compassion, because it really makes a difference when it comes to moving forward in your life on the outside. You know, every year, usually around late summer, fall time, BMW, they go to all of these cities, and they have this thing called the Ultimate Driver's Experience. If you ever had the chance to go to it, please go to it. It's completely free, other than some junk mail that they'll send you. But other than that, it's completely free, right? And one of the things that they have there is autocross racing. So they have you sit in one of their cars. They have this little course set up. They have you sit with a professional race car driver, and they teach you how to do autocross racing. And when you get into the driver's seat and it's your turn to drive, the first thing that driver's instructor does is he takes that rearview mirror and he pushes it up. You don't need it. You need to go forward fast. You have no business looking backwards right now. Go forward fast. So please, if you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness, you're just leaving, you're just waking up, look into this stuff yourself. Don't take my word for it. Do your own research. And I'm sure you will find having self-forgiveness, having self-compassion is very important for mental health, very important for emotional health, important for physical health, and important for you being able to move forward and move upward in your life on the outside. So with all that being said, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for your time. Stay tuned for the next one. Please, 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 please take it easy on yourself. Please. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.